Well, good afternoon or evening, friends, depending on where you are across this broad country of ours. It's my distinct pleasure to be able to welcome you all to this, our first Thursday evening Get to Know Thee Friend, part of CFSC's celebration of 90 years of service. So I would like to begin by letting friends know that the evening will be recorded so that we can share it with the Quaker archives and with any friends who aren't able to be here tonight. If you would not like to be recorded, please just keep your camera turned off. The other thing I would like to do at this point in time is let you know that I am coming to you from the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples and the traditional territory of the Cowichan people, and that CFSC's office is located on the traditional territory of the Wendat, Petun Nation, and most recently the Mississaugas of Credit River. This land has been the site of human activity for over 15,000 years and is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, a sacred treaty between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabeg people, the people who are with us from all across Turtle Island, and we acknowledge and respect the people of this land. To learn more, perhaps about the territory that you live on, visiting https://nativeland.ca is a good first step. So please feel free to add that to your name if you like, and Kira will post that website in the chat. At this point, beginning this evening together to draw the circle in, for those of you who are not familiar with Friends Ways, Quaker worship is generally held in silence as we seek to listen to that small, still voice. And in order to ground ourselves and collect ourselves in the circle for the evening, I'm going to ask that we just start the evening with a few moments of that silent worship. And it may feel very strange to those of you who are not familiar with sitting in silence on a Zoom call, but we'll sit for a few moments and then we'll get to the rest of the evening. And thank you all again for taking the time to join us. Thank you, friends. To begin, my name is Lana Robinson, and I am the current clerk of the Canadian Friends Service Committee. To let you know a little bit about how the evening is going to go, we'll have a little bit of housekeeping. I'll take a few moments to speak about the evening and the cause for celebration. And then I will have the distinct privilege of introducing Carol to you. And then Carol is the main event this evening, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing her story. And then we'll have some time for questions and conversation. We'd like to let you know that the evening is fairly informal, and this is just a chance to gather as friends and newcomers perhaps, and get to know a little bit more about the friends in our community. So with that, I would like to introduce the wizard behind the curtain. I told you I would use that line, Kira. Kira Mann, who is our Assistant Coordinator of Programs and Events at CFSC, and she's going to go over some housekeeping details.
Thanks, Lana. I think we've all done our fair share of Zoom in the past year, so I'm sorry if this is repetitive. But I just wanted to go over a couple of things to hopefully make this night go as smoothly as possible. So I'm going to ask that while Carol and Lana are speaking, that everyone keep themselves on mute. And then during the conversation and discussion afterwards, please keep yourself on mute unless you intend to say something. I'd also like to keep the chat space and the discussion space as safe and respectful as possible if we could. And if you're having issues with connectivity, I'd recommend turning off your video. And if that doesn't help, I'd recommend just exiting the Zoom meeting and then joining again. And beyond that, I am not technically skilled enough to help you very much, but I can do my best. Just Lana mentioned this earlier, but I just wanted to remind folks for those who have just joined us that this evening is being recorded for the Quaker archives and for friends who are not able to join us tonight. So if you do not want to be recorded, please turn off your video. And finally, I know that there's quite a number of us on here tonight. So if you want to better view Carol and Lana when they are speaking, in the top right corner, there's a little view button and you can choose between gallery and speaker mode. And I'd recommend putting it on speaker mode so you can see who is talking at the current time. Otherwise, you get the nice mosaic of all friends on your screen, which is also great. But other than that, welcome, and I'll turn it back over to Lana.
Thanks, Kira. And it is great to see all these faces. I see people I haven't seen for many, many years on here. I'm just going to talk a little bit about CFSC. The Canadian Friends Service Committee is the peace and social justice arm of the Canadian Friends in Canada. We engage in several areas of program work. We work on Indigenous human rights. We work on the criminal justice system, working toward penal abolition and restorative justice issues. And we work on any number of issues related to peace. We have a very small staff that does a lot of good work. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but would absolutely encourage you to visit the website for information on any of those program areas, the staff and members of the board and committees at this time. Quakerservice.ca is where you'll find us. Also pay attention at your monthly meetings to the liaisons who come in with bulletins every now and again. We're also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram as well. So the 90th anniversary, Canadian Friends Service Committee is celebrating 90 years of service. That says a lot just in itself. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we have a 90th anniversary website up at this time, which will be added to over the course of this celebratory year. It carries stories and testimonies from people who have been engaged in the work. There's a lot of pictures there of friends, past and present, who've also served on CFSC or been engaged in the work that CFSC has done over that long period of time. And you can imagine 90 years has seen a lot of things change, and friends who've offered their time and energy and spirit and heart into that work can take comfort to know that in that 90 years, much has changed. And also note that much remains to be changed in the future. And that's where we come in and trying to draw attention to the issues that still need our attention, and to those things that have engaged friends for so many years. Kira will post the link to that website in the chat. And if you do know any of the friends in the photos or have any information that you see is missing on any of the projects that are there, do let us know in the form at the top of the page where it says feedback. And we'll be sure to include that in the site. Again, I said it will be an ongoing project full of gifts and surprises throughout the year, I'm sure. And that can be found at, as Kira is posting, www.90years.quakerservice.ca. There's a link on our homepage as well. So this series, the Get to Know Thee Friend series, acknowledges that CFSC and the work is made possible by friends and their commitment to peace and social justice. On the 90th anniversary, we wanted to take some time to celebrate that work and honor and learn from the friends that have engaged in that work over the course of these years. We'll be hosting a night just like this, and of course it will get refined as time goes on over the next 12 months on the last Thursday of every month for the next 11 months after tonight. If you've registered to join in this, you'll get the link and the reminder to that that will come from Kira. And it's an opportunity to get to know the friends who've been engaged in service, find out why that work is important to them, how they got involved, and the things that they've been working on over the course of those years. It's also a time to share some discussion and some companionship along the way. I met Carol years ago, too many to count now, no, not that many, about 11 years ago, through my university internship program. I was able to arrange an internship with the Quaker United Nations office in Geneva and the Quaker International Affairs program through the Canadian Friends in my last year of university. And through the incredible help of Jennifer Preston and Tasman Rajat at the time, they hooked me up with Carol. And it's been my privilege and honor to work with Carol in different ways over the last 11 years. Personally, Carol has many interests, and I'm always excited to see what she's up to next. Carol is an avid cyclist and has done cycling tours in many places in the world, all over England and Scotland, Ireland, France, Italy, Holland, Belgium, Vermont, British Columbia, Ontario. And I also know that she did a cycling tour around PEI during yearly meeting one year. Carol also is famous for her skating along the Rideau Canal. I can only imagine what a familiar and friendly sight she is year after year skating along that canal. She spends time walking. She has a lovely place outside of Ottawa and spends time walking in the forests. She tells me her favorite though is barefoot on the beach when she can get to a beach. Carol is a lifelong learner and as such learned how to swim later in life and became during that time an accomplished swimmer. She also is a volunteer extraordinaire. Along with all of the other Quaker things that you're going to hear about tonight, I can tell you that Carol has been active in her own community and is a founding member of the Nurses for Social Responsibility in Ottawa. She also helped develop the concept of humanitarian ceasefires as a peace building initiative. Carol also received in 2018 the Sovereign Medal for exceptional volunteer achievements. And it should come to no surprise to any of you that she spends a lot of her time volunteering with friends. She is currently a member of the Ottawa Monthly Meeting and is clerk of the Premises Committee, she tells me. She clerked CFSC from 1997 to 2000. She co-clerked with Margaret Claire Ford from 2000 to 2003. And Carol, please, if I've misread any of this, do correct me along the way. Where I met Carol through the work with the Quaker International Affairs Program, she co-clerked that from its inception, when it began as an idea in 1997, and in one way or another was involved with that program until it was laid down in 2010. And I know she put her heart and soul into that program, and any of us who were involved in it have benefited greatly from her wisdom and experience and insights along the way. She's also clerked the Canadian Yearly Meeting alongside Ann Mitchell and Susan Stevenson. She is married to John Dixon, who I just saw his face, there he is. And I've had the pleasure of staying in their home and being treated to their hospitality. They have 3 children and 5 grandchildren scattered around between Toronto, the Ottawa area, and Southern California. I'm sure there's a lot more that we're going to find out about Carol throughout the course of the evening. And so I think at this point, I'm going to be very happy and listen with rapt attention and turn it over to Carol.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Lana, for all that. I'm speaking to you tonight from Ottawa, which is on unceded Algonquin territory. A few weeks ago, I came across a Quaker trading card that had been part of a game at CYM, however long ago, I can't remember. It was about the Quaker testimony of community, and in particular, it referred to the pleasure of, quote, working together on committees, keeping in touch with each other at meetings and phoning, letter writing, and now texting helps deepen our relationships, unquote. And we could now add Zoom, of course, but the sentiment is still true for me. The photo of friends on the front of that trading card included Gordon McClure, whose service on CFSC overlapped with my own term. I remember he would remind us from time to time, friends, we are doing the work of the Lord. A phrase that is being, A phrase that is being explored recently among Ottawa friends is getting to know each other in the things which are eternal. These few words sum up my feeling about serving on our Canadian Friends Service Committee, doing the work of the Lord, and getting to know each other in the things which are eternal. Among friends, we journey together. We are learning from each other and from our Quaker history. We carry both a sense of responsibility to the quality of our current work and to honor the tradition of those committed friends that have gone before us. Indeed, we often quote and refer to those virtuous earlier friends and to their faithfulness to their leadings. One quote I have in front of me often is from Sidney Bailey, a former Quaker representative at the Quaker UN office in New York. Said he, "Peace is a process to engage in, not a goal to be achieved." It is while working among friends that I have learned about Quaker process and discernment together and setting the standards of the work that we envision. Perhaps we are growing our theological principles and our understandings as we plan and work together. It has been among friends that my interest in and opportunity for international justice and peace work has been nourished. My initial engagement with development and peace began with my work with Nurses for Social Responsibility that Lana mentioned earlier in Ottawa, although it doesn't exist anymore. But when we together decided to raise the profile of increased spending on military might and the immense gap in basic health needs such as clean water and immunization for children in developing countries. We wrote letters to the local newspaper, to the federal government. We developed a very fun street theater presentation. We appealed to local citizens through TV talk shows. And about that time, I was also part of a local group learning more about humanitarian ceasefires, seeing them as an opportunity to develop peace-building initiatives around the temporary ceasefires to immunize children. This committee of, I honestly, I can't remember. I think we must have been 15 or 20 around the table when we gathered on a monthly basis over a couple of years trying to figure out what it was we thought we could do. In any case, this eventually led to a large international conference here in Ottawa with presenters from UNICEF, from Médecins Sans Frontières, from Stephen Lewis, from representatives from war zones of the time, came together to share information and ideas on how we might develop the idea of ceasefires, humanitarian ceasefires for developing peace initiatives. During this time, I was privileged to be invited to New York for an orientation to the UN for NGO representatives engaged in peace. It was a one-week orientation. It was very wonderful. I used the opportunity while there to have an afternoon coffee with Steve Collett at the Quaker UN office at the time. And then a few years later, I visited the Quaker UN office in Geneva. And from these visits, I learned more about how Quaker UN offices worked and how they set their priorities. When I was asked to join CFSC in 1997, I considered it an honor to be able to work with friends and their spiritual leadings for justice and peace. Each clerk of a Quaker committee puts his or her own stamp on the job, while the members themselves and the circumstances of the world around us help us to shape the direction of the work. And perhaps this is the most important thing that I have to say this evening, is that our Quaker discernment process is what I so appreciate. Sometimes we do it better than others, but the Quaker discipline of corporate discernment is vital to the health and vitality of our work. The importance of being grounded in spirit and the need to nurture our spiritual life as a foundation for the work we do. Friends from the very beginning have not hesitated to take their message to the far-flung parts of the world, to the Tsar of Russia, to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, to the Caribbean, to the early colonies in America. In his thinking about pursuing peace in Europe, William Penn observed, "What a good thing it would be if all the princes of Europe could sit down together to work out their problems." This was, of course, during the 30 Years' War in the middle of the 1600s. Quaker support for dialogue has been strong, including support for the League of Nations that was established after World War I, and then for the United Nations, established after World War II. Here at CFSC in the 1960s, Murray Thompson was hired as Peace Education Secretary. He and volunteers from Montreal, Ottawa, Kingston, and Toronto established the Quaker Peace Education Center on Grindstone Island, which hosted dialogues for representatives of various embassies and high commissions who were working here in Ottawa. They also held seminars in such things as nonviolent resistance. Later, Philip Martin and Ed Bell of Ottawa Monthly Meeting established the office of Quaker Peacemakers that hosted dinners for diplomats and then student exchanges between the Soviet Union and Canada, so that young people could get to know each other as people rather than one-dimensional enemy stereotypes. I was invited to join Ed Bell in the work when Philip felt the need to step back from it. It was at the time Peter Chapman, who was coordinator of CFSC, who phoned me and asked, did I think that Quaker Peacemakers would host a cross-Canada tour by staff from the 2 Quaker UN offices so that Canadian friends could get to know more about international work that friends do. By this time, Colin Stewart, who was in our meeting at that time, had joined Quaker Peacemakers. And as we in Ottawa considered the request, we evolved the idea of having a seminar in Ottawa, bringing friends from across the country to learn from presentations and to share their own work with international dimensions. So with help from Peter and from friends in Ottawa Monthly Meeting, we were able to plan a weekend seminar that went from Thursday evening to Saturday evening in October 1998. And Kira, maybe you would put up that first set of photos. So these are photos that were taken that weekend seminar. You will see on the left, there's John Calder, Rosemary Harkness, Ellie Siegel. Down below them is Murray Thompson, and a friend maybe that some of you will remember because she was at yearly meeting on occasion, Peggy Land from our meeting. That over on the other one, you have Carl Steeren in the left-hand corner, and that's Betty and Lucy sitting there. Why can't I remember Betty's last name? Betty Polster. Sorry, Celia. Anyway, during that meeting, we came together. We heard from the friends from the Quaker UN offices, and we heard from the friends from across Canada. There were 50 of us gathered, and shared ideas, shared understanding about what people were doing in terms of human rights, peace and disarmament, economic democracy, and the environment. Okay, you could take the photo down now. Thanks, Kira. So the minute that we had constructed from that meeting was essentially acknowledging that Canada was a middle power on the international stage, a middle power at the UN, that Quaker offices in different parts of the world were seeking ways to work more collaboratively, and Canadian friends wanted support for the international work that they were doing as well. And so it was decided we'd see what we could do about establishing a Quaker presence in Ottawa. And CFSC and Ottawa Monthly Meeting were asked to form a group to see how this could be done. And we were called the Quaker International Affairs Working Group. Could you put up photos 10 and 11? Thank you, Kira. So these are the people that were formed the International Affairs Working Group. On the right-hand side, you see Sarah Chandler with her fingers on the keyboard. That was Arthur Ranner as next to her, then Peter Chapman, and then Kate Davies from our meeting. And then over on the left are some pictures from another meeting. including John Dixon at the top, who did some babysitting service for the people who had 10 years old that needed to be at the meeting. Lucy Lemieux in the bottom left-hand corner, Ellie Siegel, Jeanne Broughton, John Calder, and Kate Davies again. Our job was to figure out what it was we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And so one of the things that some of you, you can put it down now, thank you. One of the things that some of you might remember was that in 1992, there was the first UN conference on environment and development. And we were moving up to 1992 when they were planning for Rio +10. And so we said, well, maybe what we can do is something related to a project relating to Rio +10, which was going to be in 2002. So Kate Davies, we commissioned her to write a paper on what that might look like. And so she did, and there were some good ideas there. And then, as it happened, the principal consultant from the Quaker UN office in Geneva came to talk to us, I think to try to convince us at that point, yes, that this new project might work well with the Quaker UN office in Geneva. So I'm going to refer to a little sidebar here for you. What happened was the World Trade Organization was established in 1995. So some of you with a longer memory might remember there was something called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, short GATT, G-A-T-T. And that used to look after trade in goods and services, meaning what are the rules and regulations around chalk and cheese when we trade them back and forth across borders? And services, what will be the rules about banking and things like that? And then as technology moved along, by the time they got into the early 90s, there was interesting work being done on technology that had to do with genetics and what have you. So the well-to-do countries said, what we need now is to incorporate into our trade agreements intellectual property rights. So they started from scratch. They established the World Trade Organization so that trade agreements could have goods, chalk and cheese, services, banking, lots more, but I don't really know. I have to sound like I know what I'm talking about here, and intellectual property rights. So what that meant was that when these agreements were being negotiated, agencies like United States, European Union, Japan, and so forth, and Canada, one of the smaller players, could bring their big team of lawyers and technicians and have meetings about how these trade agreements would work. However, if you happen to be a memory from a representative from a developing country, you are more than likely the only one there. And you don't have a team of lawyers and technicians with you. And sometimes more than one meeting is being held at a time. So Quakers in the UN office in Geneva said, this is not fair. This is, as they say, an uneven playing field, not a level playing field. So what they did was hire consultants from different parts of the world who were specialists in things like food security, traditional knowledge, plants and seeds. And they brought them in for off-the-record dialogues with the representatives from developing countries. And for us in Canada, what we learned was that it would be a benefit to both the individuals from developing countries, to the Canadians, and to those trying to level the playing field, so to speak, if Canadian representatives knew about these things and could talk with the representatives from developing countries. And so that is essentially the direction we went with this program. What Jeff Tansey said was, from medicines to food to knowledge itself, intellectual property is becoming a key ingredient in deciding who has access to what and at what cost. So having done that, the Quaker International Affairs Working Group, decided that this was an opportunity for us both to work on a project, learn as we went from the Quakers at the UN office in Geneva, and have something to show for our efforts. And so that's what we decided to do. And I think it was by the summertime of 2001, we had advertised the job. Then we hired Tasman Rajat. Then Peter and Rosemary Harkness said, you can have your office on the 3rd floor of our house, and we did. We opened that office with Tasman sitting at a chair and a desk with a computer. And it was probably 3 years to the day from when I had said to Lucy after the Quaker seminar, if it's going to take us 3 years to do this, we'll have lost all the momentum. But no, she was right when she said, Carol, this may take 3 years. And so there we were, ready to start with a Quaker International Affairs program. So what did Tasman have to do? What did she have to do? Well, she did work closely with Jeff Tansey, with the people on staff, Brewster Grace in the UN office in Geneva. But the first thing she had to do was build relationships, because that's what this work is built on. She had developed relationships with the Quakers, with the Canadian government representatives, with diplomats in Canada and Geneva, with the NGOs, with faith groups. And she did that. I could not imagine anybody who could have done this better. She was so professional. She represented us so well, and she had some kind of internal structure, that whatever the word is, that was exactly right for what this job needed. So as the time went on, she built relationships with the people at the Convention on Biodiversity here in Montreal, with the folks at the World Trade Organization. She helped facilitate meetings here, sometimes at the office in Peter and Rosemary's house down in their dining room, and sometimes at IDRC, the International Development Resource Center, and the Canadian International Development Center, where all became part of the team. She built relationships with them, helped them learn what the issues were, brought them into the conversation, brought a representative from one of the developing countries here to Ottawa to do presentations. So in that way, built up the understanding of this, of the unfairness of the trips, of the intellectual property rights if they weren't negotiated properly. So in 2007, we put the next set of, in 2007, we moved from 97 Powell, from Peter and Rosemary's, to the third floor of a big house, a little one-bedroom apartment is what it was, for as Peter and Rosemary were getting ready to move. So in this top picture, you see Peter in the right-hand corner, Sandra Weens sitting beside him, and I think that might be Sue Moss with her back to us. So we had this kind of thank you afternoon tea for Ottawa friends. And there on the left-hand side at the bottom is Tasman with Sasha. You can see he doesn't, just about up to the desk, and now he's taller than she is. I think he's 15 now. And there you have Carl Steeren with Tasman and Rosemary in our new office on Somerset Street. Okay, you can take that down. So QIAP, our office, and the Quaker UN office in Geneva then sponsored the publication of a series of booklets for trade relation, for people for anybody who was interested in what was going on in the WTO. And then Tasman and Jeff began to work on a book called The Future Control of Food. And then I think maybe you should put up number 16. Tasman, it doesn't come through very clearly. Tasman and Jeff won what was called the Derek Cooper Award for Food Promotion or something like that, a British agency, for this book. In the center, you see them holding up the book. On the left side is the award, a glass. On the right is a close-up of the wording on the side of the award. That glass is still at Jeff's house in Yorkshire, but I took a picture of it so Tasman would have it, a representative. They put together this book, The Future Control of Food, with chapters written by professionals from the different parts of the world, writing on different parts of the issue. Okay, you could take that down. And then we began to think, we had gone about as far as we could go with this intellectual property stuff. And Tasman brought to our attention this issue of the commons. When we started on the intellectual property stuff, some of the people referred to that as enclosure of the commons, a variety of enclosure of the commons. And some of you will remember this going back to the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, where land, waters, and other that had been shared by a community were enclosed and made private, so that the person who had arranged the enclosure had it and the rest of them did not. This was referred to as a variety of enclosing the commons when they did intellectual property rights. So Tasman had us do more learning around the issue of the commons, which was becoming I think the expression would be a higher profile public discussion at the time. And so maybe you could put up that last. So here's the committee. We got together here at Ottawa with Sarah Chandler facilitating the meeting about what would it be like to work? What have we learned now, and what is it that might contribute? What have we learned that can take us toward the commons? So on the back row, you see Sarah Ackerman, Joe Ackerman, Sandra, who had worked with us for a couple of years before Tasman was on maternity leave, as well as after. And she represented us so wonderfully well. Then over on the left, you have Jana Ryan, Tasman, Tracy McCowan. In the front row, there is Rachel McQuail, Lucy Lemieux, yours truly, and Keith Helmuth. So in the discussion, it was decided we would move towards the commons. You could take that down now, thanks, Kira. And so one of the things that happened was Tasman prepared a really detailed and wonderful paper on the commons and how what it might mean for us. And then we had an international meeting here, by here I mean at a retreat center up at Arnprior. You could put that picture up then. 19 and 20, I think they are, yeah. What you see is a loom on the left with Rachel and somebody else I'm not sure of. And on the right is the representative, I think, from Nepal. One of our activities was to, when we talked about the commons, was to use our imagination and put together things that represented things like water and fish and land and sea and air, and tried to give ourselves a sense of how these things are so connected and how they represent a resource, not for just one or two people, but for the public, a public good. One of the people who spoke to us was one who teaches at one of the universities. A Quaker woman was here who taught at an Upper New York State University about the commons. So she was one of the resources we had. Okay, you could take that down. But having said all that, we had funds from IDRC for Tasman for the publication of that paper, but we never got any more funding to move ahead on the work. So the program was closed down in, what did we say, 2011. Very sadly, I said to Lana the other day, took me a long time to let go of that. The office was closed down, but it had meant a great deal to quite a few of us. We worked a lot on that. But we said to ourselves, we've produced a lot of papers, we've done a lot of good work, and maybe it's run its course, and so it had. And I think that's it. Have I run out of my time, Lana? Is this okay if I stop now?
Carol, that is miraculously timed. I didn't have to send you a 5-minute warning or a 1-minute warning or do all of this waving about to let you know. Carol, thank you so much. Listening to your story about the QIAP work in particular, simply because I had a personal involvement with that program, brought back so many memories, and it was such an interesting and expansive learning for myself personally, and I'm sure that there are many other friends who benefited from it as well. And there are people who were involved that I had no idea were involved. Sarah Chandler, I'm looking at you. Friends, at this point in time, aside from a great deal of gratitude for Carol's sharing, I would invite anyone who has any questions for Carol to speak forward. And we are going to keep it informal, and I'll let friends know that if it becomes challenging, because there are a lot of us on this, I can hardly even call it a call, this gathering, go ahead and you can put questions in the chat, and those will be communicated, and we can speak those forward. And if you're having a hard time just speaking freely, also just sort of indicate in the chat that you'd like to get a word in, and we can accommodate that as well. Carol, before I forget, my most serious question for you about one of the things that you mentioned was the idea of street theater. I grabbed onto that right away, and I just wonder if you can just elaborate a little bit on that, because I know that, you know, it's been given many names, and it has been a really effective tool for justice work in any number of fields. Can you tell us just a little bit more about your life on the streets? I mean, your life in street theater?
Well, I had this idea, not really knowing anything about it, but we had in our meeting at the time, Linnea Rowlett, who was a friend of Eleanor, what's her name, Caroline? Eleanor
Crowder.
Both of whom,
Crowder.
Eleanor Crowder, yes. Both of whom knew a lot about theater and were involved in theater. So we had them come and talk to our nurses group. And, you know, they said, what do you want to say? And how do you want to say it, sort of thing. So we had to do some thinking. And I came up with the idea, maybe we could have a series of stills. And Eleanor said, yes, they're called tableaus. So we had this, I think there were 8 of us who eventually, I'm going to not tell you how we got there, but what the final presentation was like. We had about 8 of us, I think, and we had maybe 10 statements, let's call it, that represented this disparity in funding for healthcare and the effects of inadequate funding for healthcare in developing world. And we all wore black, and our only prop was this piece of red fabric, cheap cotton, which was probably, I don't know, 12 or 15 feet long, let's call it. So that fabric, I'll send you the pictures, Lana, later. I had used them for local. That piece of fabric was sometimes wrapped around one of the actors as a kind of, she was a mother holding a baby, and the wrapped up cloth was her baby, and the wrap was around her. So she looked like a mother carrying a dead baby. Sometimes it was a river, and there were people along the river, some who were drinking the water, and some people further upstream using it as a lavatory. You get the picture. And I don't remember, but there was a series of, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10, what was the word I called it? Stills, no, tableaus, which gave the message. And then we used it when we convinced the local, what do we call it? Television, cable television at the time, which had a call-in show. They agreed to have us come, and we showed this. And then I and the director of nursing, the dean of nursing from University of Ottawa, and I hosted this call-in program. She answered the questions. I just sort of sat there and looked smug or something. But that we used it there. And then back in those days, there was Physicians for Global Survival were called Physicians for Social Responsibility at the time. And they used to have an annual dinner. And this particular year for their dinner, they had Helen Caldecott, who was a very outspoken person, doctor against nuclear weapons. So she was the speaker, and they had a lot of people come. And so part of the evening's entertainment was this group, Nurses for Social Responsibility, doing this piece of street theater that we'd put together. Yeah, does that answer your question?
It does answer my question. And if there were a way to look you up on the IMDb, I would be doing that right away. There's
I'm sure
a question. What's that?
I'm sure it's long since gone to the ether.
Yeah, but what a fascinating thing to be doing. And I can't help but wonder, you know, where the rest of your troop is. And speaking of the rest of your troop, Carl Steeren is asking about whether Jeff Tansey continued to work on that same piece of work after QIAP was laid down. Do you have any idea?
Yes, he definitely did. He's not at the moment, but he definitely did. And the Quaker UN office in Geneva continued to do some part of that. He had connections to, he was a consultant in meetings at the World, as was Tasman, went along to some of these meetings as well. World Food Organization, the Convention on Biodiversity in Toronto. He continued to do this kind of work, but just in different fora. Is it forums? Fora, you know what I'm trying to say. Yeah. But most of that work is now, he's tied that up. He doesn't do it anymore. He's more on to disarmament issues at the moment, and mostly at home. Well, like the rest of us.
Like all of us, actually. That's great. I can remember Tasman speaking about him when we were working together on QIAP.
Would you hold on just a minute?
Yeah.
I wanted to say, at the time of our seminar, Carl prepared this small booklet called Building Bridges. And he was part of the working group afterwards for a while. But the Building Bridges, I think, was published by the Quaker pamphlet series, I think it's called. Thank you, Carl.
Pete Cross points out that you didn't speak to the gnashing of teeth that went on around the discussion of funding QIAP.
Oh, the funding. I thought somebody might ask that. So it was a very, very expensive program to run, because these professional consultants don't work cheap particularly. And they also have to be flown back and forth, as did Tasman, went back and forth to, I don't know how many times, to Geneva. But CEDA has had two areas at the time. This is the Canadian International Development Agency. They had a project facility that gave us $300,000 for over 3 years. And they also had an economic policy division that covered the cost of 3 issue papers, $90,000. And then we had more grants of $40,000 and $50,000 from them. The International Development Research Center here in Ottawa, IDRC, which I think is, I think you could call it an arm's length agency of the Canadian government. We had $200,000, I said royal, I sound as if I was doing some of this, $200,000 for the book. And then they also gave another $120,000 for the paper that I mentioned that Tasman did on the Commons. And then the Dutch government provided another $600,000 for over a 3-year period. And the UK government gave us 2 grants of $20,000 or something like that. But don't get me wrong, Canadian Friends we were supported by Canadian Friends, and we had a great deal of help, of course, from staff like Jennifer, who kept us fiscally responsible. And we Jane Orion, Peter, and Jennifer had to work out where did we fit in the budget. But eventually, I mean, we were a startup trying to figure out what it is we're going to be when we grow up. That's always hard. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but
certainly I can imagine the gnashing of teeth that might have gone on there. And what a testament to the faith in that work to get that kind of funding.
Yeah, it was the right work at the right time.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me to find that work's time comes again as awareness around some of those pieces grows. There's a question here from Gary Hillier from Annapolis Valley. Welcome, Gary. Nice to see you. He's wondering what the current initiatives or projects that are going on at the CUNO office in Geneva might be. And Carol, I'm going to send that to you, and perhaps if it's not something that's right at the top of your papers there and the tip of your tongue, you could toss it off to Jennifer, because she's probably the last one of us that was there.
I would pass it off to Jennifer, because she has the better understanding of the specialties of each of the offices. Like, they do human rights in Geneva, but they also do other things, because the World Trade Organization and the international labor stuff is there as well. And I can't remember what else. Jennifer, I'd appreciate your help here.
Yeah, sure. And I know that someone put in the chat, I think Chris Hitchcock put in the chat, the CUNO website, so people can go there to get more in-depth information. But they do, out of the CUNO office in Geneva, one of the representatives does human rights and refugees. And that's actually the area of work that CFSC works most closely with them, because they support our work on Indigenous rights at the international level. But they also, of course, have their the different pieces of peace work that they do both in Geneva and in New York. And both offices have different elements of doing peace work. The other thing that they do in Geneva that's quite interesting, so to the Geneva office, is work on the climate change and the framework on the Climate Change Convention. They do some really great work there. So, but yeah, totally check out their websites for their a lot of more details on the projects they're involved with. Both offices have lots going on and great staff, and CFSC has an ongoing working relationship with both offices, mainly with our Indigenous rights work, a few other pieces as well, but mainly our Indigenous rights work. And it's a real pleasure for us to get to work with the two CUNOs and their support for our work that we do at the UN.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Speaking of some of that work, Margaret Slavin is asking if there are any stories, Carol, about the way those resources that were produced got used by the small or developing country representatives during those international negotiations.
I can't speak to that directly, but I do know that there were many of those publications, there were many copies of them made. So they were freely given out to all the representatives in Geneva. And I think some made their way to New York, I don't know, but they were also available when Tasman would go to the Convention on Biodiversity in Montreal or to the Food and Agriculture Organization. So they were widely used. Any more than I can guess what they determined from their newspaper this morning that they read. I just don't know that. What I can tell you is that what was happening at the World Trade Organization was agreements were not being made at that level. And what was happening, which was part of why we wanted to shift geared, was trade agreements were being made regionally rather than on that broader scale. And that became quite impossible to even think about trying to follow or engage with. If you can't get it one place, go somewhere else where you have more control.
Thanks, Carol. The floor is open at this point. If there's anyone that would like to voice a question for Carol.
I have a question for Carol. Is it okay if I just ask her rather than putting it in the chat?
I would go ahead, Jen.
Carol, thank you so much for the rich description of the work that you did with QIAP, but I don't know if everyone here tonight is aware that your relationship with CFSC spans much more time and much more service than your work on QIAP. And I think that you've been one of the people who has been around CFSC for a long time in many different roles. And maybe one of the things that it would be great to hear a little bit about is what has drawn you to the different hats you've worn at CFSC and why CFSC has been important to you, especially in that spiritual place, and how much you have given to CFSC and where that comes from.
Hard. I think I did answer that a certain amount at the beginning when I talked about the importance of the spiritual foundations of the work that we try to have at service committee. These are not in any of the other NGOs I've been connected with. This is special to us, this way we make the decisions or try to make the decisions based on what we call our leadings. And I had, when I first came to service committee, as I said, I was especially interested in development and peace at the time. And I just felt that the opportunity to serve and was wonderful. But before I agreed, I spoke to Mona Callan, who was the clerk who went before me, and to Gail Wills, who was the clerk before that, to just try to understand whether I really had what was needed, what CFS needed to do that. But I think I have to say again, it's the shared discernment, that Quaker process of making the decisions, which we try to do, not always well, but we try to do in the light, so to speak. Does that answer your question, Jennifer?
Yes.
I'd like to chime in on what Jennifer said. So, Carol, were there times when you felt like you were really searching for the light, that it was hard to find it? And were there sometimes when you felt a very clear sense of the leading that was part of whatever decision was being made? Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, I think together during that International Affairs Working Group, during those 3 years between the seminar and this, we met, I think, twice a year, friends from across the country, here in Ottawa, and we had a hard time trying to figure out what it was we wanted to be when we grew up. And honestly, when Jeff came and he kind of opened a door for us, and I thought, it just seemed so right. It just seemed so right. But I have always been clear, at least since becoming involved in development and peace, I guess before I was even involved in Quaker work like this, that feeling of a leading, of a convincement that this is where I needed to be and what I needed to be doing, even if it was difficult at times. It was lots of time. But it may be difficult, but you're always in good company.
Carol, I have another question. If there's space for a moment for you to just fill us in on, I'm not sure where you found friends or where friends found you.
Oh. Do I have to say it to all these people? I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. How's that? Well, when we were living in Australia, we lived in I call it the Theology of Proximity. We went to the closest church, which was the Methodist Church. And this was in the mid-60s when they were having a lot of theological divisions. Those who wanted to explore new ways of understanding biblical script and what the responsibilities of Christians were and such like in the community, and those who wanted to stick with traditional language and ways of doing things. And then when we got here, we were, the proximal church was the United Church, so we started going there. And John said, no, that was really not where he was meant to be. But I kept on going because I was singing in the choir, and I put the kids in Sunday school. And John occasionally would go to the Quakers. And then a friend at this local United Church said to me one day, Carol, our minister, and I won't name him, is going on holidays. How about you and I take turns looking after his dog? I'll have him 1 week if you have him for another week. Oh, sure, says I, I'll do that. So I think it was on the second last day, I had this dog and I was taking him out for a walk. No, I was on my bicycle and I had him on a leash. And away we went. And then I got home and then I said, oh, we'll just do one more round. And that was the wrong thing because another dog came out to have a fight. And there I was under the bicycle with a broken leg and two dogs fighting on top. So I spent 10 days in hospital then, and I was home a few days, and the minister's wife came around, and the first thing she said was, well, it's not our fault. And honestly, she didn't. I had 3 kids at that age. It was 4 something, 9 and 10, let's call it. And I thought, well, this is really not faith community I'm interested in. So at the time, Dorothy Starr was teaching in the nursing school at University of Ottawa, where I just finished the requirements for a degree. And I phoned her and said, Dorothy, tell me about your Quaker meeting, when and where. So she told me, and I went, and I got out of the car and walked across the street with my crutches. Man, here was Gerald Turnbull in his big Quaker hat coming down the steps with his arm stuck out. And he said, you must be Carol Dixon. And I thought, I've come to the right place, I believe. Well, that's most of the story.
That is a wonderful story, Carol. And aren't we all so happy?
That I broke my leg, you mean?
No, I that almost came out of my mouth, but no. And I'm not really sure that I ever thought riding a bike with a dog on a leash was ever a good idea.
No, it's not.
No.
Well, we had a neighbor who could do that. And I said, well, if Cam can do it, so can I. But of course, I didn't. I was wrong.
Friends, I wonder if I just might interject here before people start to disappear. I recognize most names on here, but not all. And if we have any newcomers, and if any newcomers are interested in attending a Quaker meeting, you can find the locations of those meetings by going to the Quaker.ca website. And on the home page, there is a tab, Find a Meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. And if I could just interrupt here for 1 minute, I just want to say, Carol was one of the first board members that I met when I started at CFSC about 4 years ago. And I finagled her into doing an interview with me on video, which has never been released because I was so interested in the conversation that I continually interrupted her and the footage could not be used. So I do apologize for that. So I'm so glad that she could be here tonight. And I also just want to say that although Carol isn't officially a member of CFSC right now, she continues to let me personally, I don't know how many other staff do this, but I do it on a fairly regular basis of emailing her and asking her questions. And so the 90th anniversary website, I think should also be attributed to her, because I've sent her probably 100 emails asking her who people were and the story behind this and the story behind that. And she continues to just answer me and is so kind and nice. So I just want to say thank you so much. And I'm so glad you could be our first speaker in this series tonight. So thank you, Carol.
Well, honestly, it's really an honor to be able to be here to do this.
I am very pleased to have been able to be a part of this. And I see that our time is winding down, friends, but I see that Lily has a question. So if Lily, if you would like to ask your question of Carol.
Hi, Lily, are you there? Lily is our granddaughter. She's our youngest, and she is 6 years old. You should know that she's a hockey player, and she gets all done up. She has an Uncle Rocco who keeps her in helmet and pads and skates and whatever else. She wobbles around the rink, and she thinks that Lily, are you there? Can you tell us about yourself? I guess she's not going to talk right now.
Hi, Lily.
I don't have her on my screen.
I do.
Where are you? Where are you, Lil?
I've been chatting to hers. I think perhaps her mom has been helping with typing.
Oh, okay, okay.
She said she loves eating oatmeal with her granny, and she loves swimming with you.
Oh, yeah. But it's not oatmeal, it's porridge, you know.
She called it oatmeal.
I know.
She called it porridge.
I know. Are there some other questions I should be asking? Other questions I should be answering? Quaker presence at the UN is, oh, yeah. Jennifer, why don't you tell them how let me just back up a bit. One of the things that you might not know was that originally the two Quaker UN offices were established by Quaker Service in England and American Friends Service Committee. But at the time, they decided what really needed to, who they were really representing was not just British and American friends, they were representing Quakers around the world. So they're there as Friends World Committee for Consultation, FWCC. They are the ones under who Jennifer represents, who Quakers represent when they're at the UN. Do you want to say more about that, Jennifer?
I'm going to say that that's a story for another evening. So thankfully we have a whole year of evenings. I do want to make sure that everybody saw in the chat that Lily was trying and her sound just wasn't working, but Lily was yelling, and what she was saying is, "Hi, Granny, I love you." And I think that's a much better note for us to finish on than me talking about my work. So we'll do that another night, Carol. It means you have to come back.
I'm good with that. I love you too, Lily, darling, if you can hear.
Thank you, Jen. And that's a lovely segue for me to wrap up the evening by thanking you all for joining us tonight. For also to letting you know, if you wouldn't mind to take a moment to fill out a survey that Kira has put up there on the Get to Know the Friend page on our website. We also hope that you will join us on the last Thursday of February. Keep your eyes open for that, February 25th, for a discussion with Vince Zelazny from New Brunswick Monthly Meeting. And he will be speaking to us about his service work with regard to climate change and the environment. It's been my privilege to get to know Vince a little bit better in the last couple of years, as he is currently serving as the co-clerk, associate clerk for CFSC, and will soon be stepping into those clerking shoes. So I'm sure Vince will inspire us with his many, many stories and years of work in the environment. And he's a teacher in that area. So come prepared with your notepad and everything else. I look forward to seeing all of you again. Please feel free to check out the 90th anniversary website, the quakerservice.ca homepage, our Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and we also hold meeting for worship on Wednesday mornings, and I can only think of the Pacific time from 7:30 to 8:30 Pacific. I guess that's 10:30 to 11:30 Eastern.
There's Lily with her hand up.
Thank you so much, Carol.
A great pleasure. A great pleasure.